This conference will now be recorded.
No, but there is no
and then we can begin. I can see Marianne and Reynard are having problems with the audio. Can you hear me now? Okay, so welcome everyone to the second training. Thank you for attending. For today, if you have any questions, please just type them in the chat section so that we don't have to interrupt the presenter. And we'll have some time allocated towards the end to address those questions. The areas for discussion today are the rules governing speeches, which is page 21 to 23 of the rules of procedure, and rules governing points. Rules governing points, which is pages 24 to 26. And today the training will be conducted by Laura. She's one of the directors and chairing and training. So just pay attention. As I said, if you have any questions, please just type them as we go along in the chat area, and we'll address them at the end. And just limit your questions to the topics being presented. If you have any questions regarding the conference, we'll have an opportunity to address those either later on today or on our Instagram page. So yeah, without further ado, Laura, you can take the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Like has been said, my name is Laura, and today I'll be carrying us out through the second training, which is about rules governing speech and the various points that we need to understand. So the expectations that one would need to have, like at the end of this, you'll need to know how to yield and to whom you would yield to. You need to know about the GSL, which is the General Speakers List. You need to know what is expected of you during the GSL. And then you also need to know the time limit. You also need to know what a right of reply is. And finally, the purpose of points and the points that are provided in the Simon rules of procedure. So we'll begin with rules governing speech. Now under here, we'll be dealing with rules on the speakers list, on speeches, yielding, comments, and on rights of reply. So the first thing is the general speakers list. For those who have attended conference before, I'm sure you know how, like what a general speakers list looks like what happens. And we see that there are some things that you need to know about the general speakers list. First thing is, usually the default speaking time is 90 seconds, but the chair can entertain motions to set a speaking time. But at default, the time is 90 seconds. Secondly, this general speakers list is non-exhaustive. If you've been to conference, you realize that it may start on Monday, and then you can go through the caucuses, but it can also continue on Tuesday, on Wednesday, on Friday. Like, it's non-exhaustive. It never ends up until the end of conference. And then also, it is for a topic area that is being discussed by the committee. So looking into the GSL, we start with the speaking time, of which, like I said earlier, it is 90 minutes of speaking time, but our chair can entertain motions to set a speaking time. And then secondly is, then as a member of a committee, you must add your name to, as by request. You have to request for your name to be added to the general speakers list. What happens during conference or during the mock debates is, we have the placards. These are placards with the names of countries. So for example, if your country is United States of America or China, when the chair calls out those who wish to be added to the general speakers, those who wish to be added to the general speakers list, please raise your placards. So that's when you raise your placards. And while you're in the general speakers list, you are only allowed to speak for 90 seconds. Sorry, I had said 90 minutes earlier, but the default speaking time is 90 seconds. So you need to speak within those 90 seconds. And then, should you not have been able to be added to the general speakers list, you will hear the chair say, please write a note to the chair. One thing that I would like to emphasize is, in everything that you do during this, when you're going through the caucuses, when you're going through the GSL, when you're speaking, there is need for you to show the respect for the chair. In that, for example, in this situation, it is the chair who calls out for people to be in the general speakers list. It is the chair who will ask you to go and speak during the general speakers list. So, and during the caucuses, it is up until a chair recognizes you to speak is when you can speak. So ensure that every single time you speak, it is with the permission of your chair. Also, another thing is, there is the MUN software. I believe, I hope we've seen it before. It's an MUN software that shows countries that are present, countries that are carrying out the deliberations, countries that have been slotted. So once you are recognized by the chair to be slotted in for the general speakers list, you are added onto that list. And that list is usually projected for convenience's sake, so that while general speakers list is going on, there is no time lapse in between. Everyone is speaking within their time and following the list as it goes. Yeah, so it gives you as a delegate time to prepare yourself for what you'd like to speak about. It's a default activity, just like I'd said earlier. It's a default activity, so it runs throughout the week. Or as you can see, that is how the XMUN software looks. So during the general speakers list, if you raise your placard, maybe there are countries like Zimbabwe, China, USA, South Africa, different countries, they are slotted in the white dialog box. You can see that's where they are slotted in, and then the list follows. So if a country is chosen, that country, like for example, China will speak. And as you can see, it's 1 minute, 30 seconds, which is 90 seconds. And that is it's very specific. Now, before we leave I'd like for the GSL to continue to run, because now we're going into time limit on speeches. If you look at time limit on speeches, it basically tells you on how you should carry yourself out when there is limits to speech. So every person is allotted a time, and this time is very specific. Take for example, like we have just seen right now, the GSL is specific to 90 seconds, and then maybe during caucuses you can see that there is time per speaker, and maybe it may be 2 minutes, it may be 1 minute, maybe 1.5 minutes. Now this time is very specific. Here, for example, if we go back to the XMUN, we see that for example, now China only has 21 seconds. Should China's time elapse, you will see a chair telling China, your time is up. And that's when you have to be very specific. As a delegate, you have to time yourself, because you need to be able to speak within that 90 seconds and articulate what exactly you'd like the committee, whichever way you'd like to steer the committee, or whatever you'd like to say to the committee. So at the same time, regardless of the fact that the time limit is very specific, a chair can exercise their discretion to allow a delegate to finish. So, for example, maybe I am the delegate of St. Kitts and Nevis, and I was speaking on something that was very dear to our country during the GSL. And I continue speaking and speaking, and 90 seconds has elapsed in the software. The chair will tell me, delegate, your time is up. But the chair also has the discretion to let me finish, not to continue speaking way above time. Because remember, I'm not the only one who has been slotted to speak. So this time limit ensures that everyone gets a fair chance at articulating what it is they have brought forth for the committee. So at this point, now you'll hear the chair saying, delegate, your time is up, but chair's discretion, I will allow you to finish. It's usually, so when you're given that time to finish, ensure that it is closing statements. Don't continue articulating so much. Just basically summarize exactly what you wanted to speak about. And exactly what you wanted to speak about. And then also the most important reason why the chair may allow for you to extend time is because of the varying fluency in English. There are some people who may not be able to articulate themselves as well and as fast as other people. At times, we understand that grammar may not, there's a word you'd like to put out, but it takes time for you to, there's something you'd like to put out, but it's taking time for you to articulate that. So ensure, like, just try your best to keep your facts and everything simple, so that you will be able to be within your time limit. But a chair, out of their discretion, can be able to allow you to complete if you have issues with fluency. Yes. Another important thing is, now we're moving to the yields. So under yielding, I'd like us to first of all know what yielding is and the 3 types of yielding. So beginning with yielding, the first thing is, a yield is when you're given, let's say you've been given a substantive right to speak. You've been given right to speak on a substantive matter. This means, for example, if you're speaking on cyber crimes, and you can only yield on substantive matters. There are procedural matters and the substantive matters. Procedural matters are on the way debate happens and it's to the process. And then substantive matters is to the what exactly you're talking about. So for example, if it's a procedural matter, if you're maybe talking about cybercrime and you're the United States of America, and you have allies, you have friends who are also facing the same problem as you. So you can say, the delegate of USA, you speak and speak and speak, talking about how cybercrime has been an issue in your country, such and such and such. And after that, you see that your time has not ended. So you can yield to another person. But remember, it needs to be substantive. That's what I was trying to put out. It needs to be about what you're speaking about. It can't be It can't be about procedural matters. So like, for example, we have Greece here who is speaking, and they are speaking, articulating themselves, and after that, they still have lapsing time, and they'd like to give another country. So they will yield to another delegate. So in this situation, they have yielded to Colombia. So Colombia will continue to speak. So this one, so what I'd like us to understand from yielding is, this is once you're given that right to speak on a substantive issue, very important, substantive issue, you can yield to another person at the conclusion of your speech. This is at the conclusion of your speech. And remember, you must declare any yield at the conclusion of your speech. For example, if maybe during lobbying you had spoken to another country and they had told you, when you get speaking time, let me add on something that you are saying. If you don't say I yield, I now, like for example, you are Greece and you want to yield to Colombia, if you don't say you yield to Colombia, the chair will not recognize that Colombia has been granted to speak on your remaining time. So you must articulate, you must provide that you are yielding this time to another person. You're yielding this time to another delegate. Now, the next thing is the 3 yields. So there are 3 ways you can yield. You can yield to another delegate, you can yield to questions, and you can yield to the chair. So if we begin with yielding to another delegate, I think we've seen it even with the XMUN. Once you have articulated your issues, maybe you're Greece and you've articulated your issues and you have remaining time, you can offer your remaining time to another delegate. Now, the important thing is this other delegate must accept the yield. If they don't accept the yield, then the chair continues with the speaking time that has been allotted. If there was another country that was next in speaking, the chair will continue. Now, if the delegate accepts this yield, the chair will recognize the remaining time. Like, for example, Greece is talking, they finish talking, and now they yield it to another country. Now, the important thing to understand here is, I think at times, if you've attended Simon before, you've seen a situation where there are either Simon, the conference, or even the mock debates, or even debate, you see that there are delegations. Now, delegations are where there is more than one person representing a country. So if you're more than one person representing a country, remember, as you go as a delegation, you have one word, you have one say, you have one vote. So everything you do as, for example, like the package has given us Uganda. Everything you're doing here, you're doing as Uganda. Everything you say as Uganda. If any one of you speaks, it's for all of you. So ensure that if you're yielding the floor to another delegate, it cannot be a delegate from the same member state. You are all a delegation. So whatever you say once, it applies to all of you. Now, that's why they're saying double delegation is not considered a yield. And yes. Then another thing that you need to realize under yielding to another delegate is you cannot, once you continue speaking, like for example, we had the Greece and then we had Colombia. Colombia cannot return the speaking time back to Greece. You cannot yield back to the original delegate. For example, we have India here. Okay, we have Colombia. Colombia is fine. So Colombia speaks, and then after that, they yield their time to India. Oh, okay. I think there's a problem. But if Colombia is allowed to yield their time to, if they're allowed to yield their time to India, okay, let's say we have Iraq and they'd like to yield to another delegate. So if they yield to Greece and Greece continues to speak on their time, if Greece still has time, they cannot yield back to Iraq. That is the rule there. So as you're yielding to another delegate, ensure that 1, this delegate accepts the yield. 2, you have your conclusion remarks. So you will not be allowed to speak again on that time. So that remaining time will be offered to that other delegate. Should that delegate complete, they cannot refer you back. They cannot return the time back to you. And then also remember that you cannot yield the floor over to a delegate from the same country as you. So as a country, you cannot, you have one voice as a country, so you cannot yield back. And then also, yeah, that's basically it about yielding to another delegate. If it's yielding to questions, if a delegate speaks and you'd like to yield questions, the chair will select and limit to 1 question each. For example, if I am Grace and have spoken about something, now the chair, and I say I'm open to, you're yielding your time to questions, questions will be allowed. But now it's 1 question each. And another thing you need to notice is follow-up questions are only allowed at the discretion of the chair. So ensure that as you're asking a question, it is also important is ensure that as you're asking a question, it is to provide for information, not to embarrass a country or to put them on the spot. Ensure you're seeking out information. For example, if it's the US, you're asking a question to the US about cybercrime, ask them, so as the United States of America, what have you guys been able to do to deal with the situation, the problem that you're facing? So under yielding to questions, ensure that you're selected by the chair, and then follow-up questions are chosen at the discretion of the chair. Also ensure that the questions you ask are to elicit information. If you're yielding to, next we're going to yielding to the chair. If you're yielding to the chair, this is made if the delegate does not wish his or her speech to be subject to questions. Now here the chair moves to the next speaker, and only 1 yield is allowed per speech. I think we've seen this in the debates, like you speak and then you say, I yield my time back to the chair. The chair will continue. So you will not be open to any questions. Yes. And then no yields are allowed. Remember, the one thing is no yields are allowed if the delegate is speaking on a procedural matter. And another important thing is, even if your time is up, you will see that if the time ends, you'll be told, delegate, your time is up. Please ensure that you yield your time back. Yield back to the chair, because it is a sign of respect. You must yield back to the chair. So we go to right of reply. Right of reply is raised when a delegate whose personal or national integrity has been impugned, I think disrespected by another delegate, and this is submitted only in writing. So the things about right of reply is it is submitted to the chair, and it is on the basis of personal or national integrity disrespect, and then it is up to the chair. It is the chair's discretion as to whether he will grant the person that opportunity to reply. And remember, a right of reply cannot interrupt speech. Yes. And you cannot, also another thing is you cannot do a right of reply to a right of reply. For example, if a country speaks, if maybe USA speaks about Iran, they are hiding nuclear weapons and we would like full disclosure of their nuclear weapons, and Iran, in maybe our situation, may not be having these nuclear weapons, or may have been painted in a way to be disrespected, like to be that the USA has disrespected their country, they will write a right of reply to the chair. Should the chair allow for them to have this right of reply, the USA cannot reply to their right of reply. Yes. So I think that is all about rules governing speech. We will now go to rules governing points. And this one describes the points that can be made during a committee session. Yes. So what we will be covering here is the purpose, why we have rules governing points. We'll also look at point of information to the chair. We'll look at point of personal privilege, point of order, and point of parliamentary inquiry. Yes. So beginning with the purpose. The reason why these points are allowed is because we realize that the way Model UN works is very different from every other way you have debated before. So you cannot just, in Model UN, you can't just speak like that. There has to be order. So the reason why these points are brought in is they help to facilitate procedure. So they make the committee session more fruitful, and it can be steered in the right direction, and it prevents that two-way communication that is very disruptive. So remember, as a delegate, one thing you must remember is there's no two-way communication between delegates. So, and two-way communication is not allowed. It is out of order and it can be penalized. So just ensure that if you want to speak to another delegate, you'd have to pass through the chair to speak to another delegate. So that aside, we will look at point of information to the chair. A point of information to the chair it is used to approach the days. For example, if maybe you're working on something, maybe a working paper or maybe a draft resolution, and something needs to be articulated to the chair that you know best, like it's easier for you to articulate it to the chair, you can ask point of information to the chair. They will ask you to state your point, then you say, may I approach? Now, if they accept, you can approach and articulate exactly what you wanted to tell them. And then point of parliamentary inquiry is just to obtain clarifications on rules of procedure. We'll look at that at the end. So I want to go to point of personal privilege. Point of personal privilege, this is as to personal discomfort. You see it's written personal privilege. So maybe a delegate experiences personal discomfort which will prevent them from carrying out the deliberations effectively. For example, the room is too hot, another delegate is not speaking audibly, maybe the lights, you need electricity, maybe your speaker, like audibility, maybe after another person has spoken and you'd like to comment, but your speaker is not working, your microphone, sorry, is not working. So this can be raised. One special thing about this is it can only interrupt speech when it is issues of audibility. For example, a country, Saudi Arabia, the delegate of Saudi Arabia is speaking, and they are speaking in a very low and soft voice, and maybe the committee room is big, you cannot clearly hear them, even though they are speaking through their microphone. So ensure that, just raise point of personal privilege, they'll tell you state your point, audibility. But ensure even as you're raising this point of personal privilege, do it in a way of respect, and ensure that it's just say, may the delegate of Saudi Arabia please just speak a bit more audible. And the chair now will tell them to speak more audible in a very respectful manner. Remember, it's only audibility that you can interrupt speech. But for the rest, you have to wait for a delegate to finish speaking. So like if it's you raise a point of personal privilege, can the AC be turned on? But these ones can only be provided for after a delegate has finished speaking. You don't interrupt another person. So the next is a point of order. Point of order, maybe when a committee is in session and as a delegate, like the way now we're carrying you through training and you know the way things are supposed to be done. Now, this point of order shows that it is like you're indicating to the chair or to the committee that the rules of procedure are not being properly followed. But remember, you have to be very respectful as you're carrying this out. For example, maybe on voting procedures, or maybe on the working paper, the procedure for tabling a working paper. Those ones we will look at in other days, but maybe, for example, maybe the voting procedure is not being carried out properly. As a delegate, you would raise a point of order. So this one will, you will raise a point of order and the chair will look back and see, are we following the exact rules of procedure? Yes, but remember, the only one that can interrupt speech is the point of personal privilege. So here you cannot interrupt speech. Let people complete speaking, and then after that you can raise your point of order. Remember also, points of order are not on the substance, they are on procedure. Remember, it's rules of procedure, so it must be on procedure. You cannot raise a point of order on cyber crimes. It needs to be on the rules of procedure. For example, voting, like what is expected during voting. The next one is points of parliamentary inquiry. Now, point of parliamentary inquiry, this happens when the floor is open. Now, a delegate can rise to a point of parliamentary inquiry to ask regarding the rules of procedure. For example, if you're not sure for example, if delegates speak and you'd like to ask them questions in a respectful manner, you can raise a point of parliamentary inquiry to ask the chair, how can I ask other delegates questions on the points that they are providing for on the topic? For example, if it's time for voting and you'd like to ask questions, you don't really know, not ask questions, sorry, but you don't really know how voting happens, you can raise a point of parliamentary inquiry, then you will be explained to how this works. Yes, I think that is it. But remember, the only point that interrupts a speaker is point of personal privilege. So now we'll open it to questions regarding what we've done today, the rules governing speech and the various points. Yes, so questions? Anyone with a question?
I think we have some questions on the chat. If you go to the chat area, you'll see some questions there. I think 2 questions, one from Charity and one from Kausa.
Okay.
So the first question by Charity is, what is a procedural matter? Yeah, you can go ahead.
So procedural matters are, just as, to break it down, just with the way that the word says, procedural, like it is with regard to the nitty-gritty, the things that are making the deliberations move. For example, procedural matters are how to vote, how are we voting, how are we speaking, how can we speak, how can we yield. Those are procedural matters. The difference between them and substantive matters is that substantive matters is, like, for example, like I'd spoken earlier, if the USA is speaking about cybercrime and how they are being disturbed by it, that is a substantive matter. It is the flesh of what they are deliberating about. But now, what is enabling the committee to move, enabling us to have a working paper or perhaps a draft resolution, which is now how the delegates are speaking, how the delegates are voting, how the delegates are replying to each other, how these delegates are replying to each other. That is now what is procedural. So, like, for example, if it's time for voting, if you have issues, if you'd like to understand how voting is done. Now, if you raise a point of parliamentary inquiry, remember, it's just to procedural matters. That's where now you can, that's a good example of how you can raise that point of parliamentary inquiry. Like that's a good example of a procedural matter, like voting. If you don't understand voting, then you will be explained to. That is now exactly what is facilitating the movement of the committee. But now for substantive, it is the flesh, like what is being discussed. Yes, that is the first question. I can see, how do you set an agenda on the speakers list? I think that is not really, it's not really an issue for the delegates. That is the chairs, but I'll explain that after if you go through the mock debates and the conference, you will see that after you've gone through roll call, you've gone through the general speakers list, you'll be asked to raise a motion. So when you raise that motion, that is now the agenda for the day. Like if for example, you'd like to speak about the effects of cybercrime to international security. So if you have that topic and you'd like to provide it to others, you can just, if you'd like to provide it to others, you'll just raise that, and now the chairs will acknowledge it after it has been voted for. So
Yeah, and also I think this was covered in the last training.
so that's how it's done.
Yeah, I was
Any
saying
other question?
this was the question on agenda was covered in the last training. Ideally, when it comes to setting an agenda, is when you have two topics, so two topics for your committee. But you see, for Simoon, each committee has only one topic, so ideally there is no need to set an agenda. It's already set by virtue of only having one topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I can answer Kausa's question on the right of reply. So usually with the right of reply, it's limited usually to 15 or 30 seconds. So it's very difficult to have a right to follow up, because that would now encourage a back and forth between the two delegations. So when you're dealing with a right of reply, it's best that if you're granted that right to reply, you just state simply the statement that was insulting to your country, and then you respond to it. And then if both parties are still not satisfied, you can raise it when you're given another opportunity to speak, either in the current caucus or in the next caucus. Yeah, but it's very difficult to have a response, because you might end up going back and forth, especially considering it's a sensitive topic such as being insulted. It might lead to a back and forth, and that's what the committee is trying to avoid. There's another question by Tara. I think that will be answered. As I said, questions that are not regarding the training and are more directed towards conference will be answered on either Instagram or by the SG. So we'll just note that and get back to you with the response. Jalen has another question. Can you approach the chair about parliamentary inquiry? Ideally, yes, that's allowed, because when you raise the point, you may ask, once you raise the point and you're recognized, you may ask the chair that may I approach if you're not comfortable with raising the inquiry in front of everyone. So that's allowed. With regard to Jolly's question on position papers, yes, ideally, each delegation must come up with a position paper. So if you're in a double delegation, that means you're two delegates or two or more delegates representing one country, you'd have to come up with a joint or combined one. You'd come up with one similar position paper. Okay. Are there any other questions? You can type them. I think we have around 7 minutes or 5 minutes to go. Jolie is asking, what if you don't have one? I mean, you know, there's an award for the best position paper. So if you want to be eligible for the award, it's advisable you have one. And then also, it helps you with researching. Coming up with the position paper will help you to research on the topic for your committee. And it will give you talking points either during the speakers list or during the caucus. So ideally, it's for your own benefit having one. Yeah, Tara's asked the question again. As I said, we've noted it. It will be addressed. The question on whether Simon is happening on the planned dates, that will be addressed later by someone different. So we've noted it down. We'll address it. With regards to the format on writing position papers, yes, that can be shared. Actually, we can have a separate session on writing position papers and what to consider or what to take note of. Salma, can representatives operating under double delegation speak to each other when speeches are being made? Ideally, that's discouraged because during the committee sessions, no two-way conversation is allowed. So the best way to do that would be to write notes to each other. Even though you'd be sitting together, it might still disrupt the committee session if you engaged in speech. So just write notes to each other, and yeah, you can use that to communicate. Yeah, Kausa, I think as I said, we'll have a different session on writing the position papers. Jalen has a question on what double delegation. Double delegation basically means so each delegate is given a country to represent, but in some instances you might have 2 or more delegates being given the same country. So if you are 2 or more delegates representing the same country in the same committee, that means you're a delegation. So a double delegation would be 2 delegates representing 1 country. Yes. Charity's question, I don't know if that's addressed to us. Just clarify, please. Katra, is it possible to switch committees? No. The committee you sign up for is a committee you will be placed in. Jolly's question is whether there'll be a mock debate. That will also be answered at a later time. Yeah. So I think we want to wrap up. Maybe we can take just 2 more questions. It's not general. Is this with regards to high school chairs? Charity, so just clarify. Because the chair applications have been closed. So just clarify on that. So yeah, I'll answer Charity and then Catherine, then we'll end the session at that. So how many times can an unmoderated caucus happen? Ideally, it can happen as many times as the delegates in a committee would like. But then again, that's down to the chair's discretion because it would not make sense having continuous unmoderated caucuses and the delegates are not coming up with something substantive. So yeah, so that's basically it can go on if it's beneficial to the committee, you can have as many unmoderated caucuses And then it goes again to the voting. If the members of the committee do not vote for an unmoderated caucus, then it's not likely to happen. Jalen is asking if people in university and high in the same room. No, there'll be different committees for high school and university delegates. With regard to press corps application, that will also be addressed later. I don't have the answer for you right now. No, for General Assembly, you will have one common General Assembly. You'll just have different committees. Yes. So I think we'll end it at that. If you have any other questions, please direct them either to the website. There's an email address on the website. You can also direct it to our Instagram page or also on Facebook. So thank you for attending the training. We'll meet again next week. So okay, yeah, Glory will just type out the email address, and I think she'll also type out the Instagram handle if she can, if she's in a position to. Yes, Emanuela is asking if training is on Saturday. Yes, it's next Saturday, 2 to 3. And just answered the question you've asked. There will be separate committees for high school and university. Okay, thank you once again for attending, and have yourself a nice Saturday. Thank you to Laura for the wonderful session, and yeah, have a nice afternoon. Goodbye.